In 1934, a group of America's leading business executives, the heads of the asbestos industry, had a meeting to discuss what to do about the fact that asbestos was killing their workers. Company doctors had warned these executives for years that their product was causing certain respiratory symptoms in the miners and other asbestos workers. Executives at Johns Manville, Asbestos Manhattan, and other large asbestos producers had responded by keeping employees in the dark. When one employee became too sick to work, they'd simply be moved to another position and replaced by another worker. A few employees had even filed lawsuits claiming that their breathing problems were caused by years of working with asbestos dust. The executives were warned that if they were sued, their companies would have a better case if they could say that they were only following the recommendations of a recognized expert. With that presentation, Big Asbestos hatched a plan to attack the messenger, control the message, introduce doubt into the science, report all good data and bury negative findings, and above all, to never admit their mistakes. From the tobacco industry to big oil, many other industries have followed their playbook and have even hired the same PR firms the asbestos companies hired. Unpacking the asbestos story reveals the methods that all kinds of big industries use to muddy the waters. For half a century, the asbestos industry denied that their products were killing people. Discover how deep the lies went on Asbestos Exposed. Humans have dealt with tuberculosis for thousands of years, but in the 1880s, a researcher realized that it was caused by a bacteria in the lungs and named it tuberculosis or TB. At the time, 1 in 7 people were dying from TB and there was no cure. But in the late 1880s, doctors started to say that fresh air could help a patient's prognosis. So many places sprung up throughout the world as destinations for TB patients hoping to recover from the disease. An American doctor who studied TB named Dr. Edward Livingston Trudeau established a tuberculosis hospital in the Saranac Lake region of New York's Adirondack Mountains. Fresh air isn't enough to keep TB at bay, and Dr. Trudeau himself unfortunately died of tuberculosis. But his legacy continued, and his medical center at Saranac became one of the world's premier centers for tuberculosis research. In fact, Saranac was just the kind of outside expert of recognized reputation that the asbestos industry was looking for to counter-message an increasing body of medical evidence that asbestos products cause major health problems. So they had dispatched their representative, a man by the name of Dr. Anthony Joseph Lanza. As a young physician, Lanza had published a landmark report describing the lung diseases caused by inhaling dusts, a category of disease known as pneumoconiosis. Dr. Lanza was himself an expert of recognized reputation, just the kind of guy who could vouch for asbestos. Dr. Lanza was a noted skeptic of asbestos diseases. The British medical officials had long stated that asbestos was causing breathing diseases, but Lanza claimed that his client's asbestos came from Canadian mines and was therefore different from the African asbestos supposedly causing damage in the UK. But one English doctor replied to Dr. Lanza that 80% of England's imported asbestos comes from Canada, not Africa, so it shouldn't make a difference. But in those days, there wasn't the kind of communication needed for people to know about debates like this, and for a while, the North American asbestos industry successfully kept a lid on everything it knew about the many health dangers of asbestos, including hiding the fact that it causes cancer. Lanza had already conducted asbestos research paid for by the asbestos industry. In fact, hiring him was discussed at length in 2 different meetings with representatives from Johns Manville and Asbestos Manhattan in late 1933. Lanza had even shown his understanding of the asbestos industry's legal concerns. At the instructions of his sponsor, Lanza had soft-pedaled the dangers of asbestos in his final report. But by this point, Dr. Lanza had become the medical director for the Metropolitan Life Company and wasn't the kind of supposedly neutral party they needed to sell their message. Thousands of businesses had bought group insurance and workers' compensation policies from MetLife, and Lanza's job was on giving medical advice on how to minimize payouts from those policies. That included helping granite companies with employees who developed silicosis, which Lanza had written about. And it of course also included the asbestos companies. Asbestos is a group of rock types that are incredibly resistant to heat and fire more than nearly any other substance. Like silica, a dusty material in granite that can cause breathing problems, asbestos also breaks up into fibers that are easily inhaled. Many employees with silicosis were making insurance claims, so the asbestos industry was worried they would be next. Dr. Lanza contacted the Saranac Laboratories about conducting a study into the health effects of both silica and asbestos. The findings of these studies were critical. Around the world, workers were realizing that silica and asbestos were giving them health problems, and they demanded protection. A strike by workers at the largest asbestos mine in the world, Johns Manville's mine, got widespread attention. The asbestos industry was worried about two things. The first was lawsuits. The second was that local and state governments from Britain to North America were considering increased regulation to protect industrial workers. The asbestos industry realized it needed to act. Many of the public officials trying to pass regulation would refer to published scientific results. The Saranac Labs reports were the big play for the asbestos and silica industries to influence debate, downplay the dangers, and limit regulations as much as possible. The relationship between Saranac and Dr. Lanza and his clients would deepen, and as it did, the asbestos industry incrementally edited and altered the scientific findings and how they were reported. The first conflict occurred quickly. The Saranac Labs published some data that spelled out the dangers of silica in a very vivid way, and that data was used in a government report that made the silica industry look bad. The reliability of science is traditionally thought to be that the scientists stay objective and publish data, even if it doesn't support what they predicted or what the sponsors paying for the study want to find. But Dr. Lanza, the medical director for MetLife, didn't see it that way. He contacted the doctors at Saranac Labs and demanded that they not release what he saw as the company's confidential information. Saranac Labs apparently wanted the funding to continue, and they did not make the same mistake again. But the deception that Saranac and their asbestos corporate sponsors would undertake was just beginning, because Saranac Labs would discover what hundreds of health investigators around the world have found, that asbestos causes cancer. And for the massive and still growing asbestos industry, that info was too hot for the public. Tune in to the next chapter of the Saranac Labs story on the next Asbestos Exposed.